Robert Block is an emeritus professor of pediatrics and immediate past Daniel C. Plunkett Chair, Department of Pediatrics, the University of Oklahoma School of Community Medicine in Tulsa. He was elected by the membership of the American Academy of Pediatrics as president-elect in October 2010 and served as president from October 2011 through October 2012. He received his degree from University of Pennsylvania and completed his pediatric residency at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. He is a diplomat of the American Board of Pediatrics, and he holds, and this is really important, certificate number 1 from the American Board of Pediatrics in Child Abuse Pediatrics. I hold certificate 73. Number 1 is really cool. He is a past president and past board chair of the American Academy on Violence and Abuse, the national organization focused on increasing healthcare professionals' education and academic research on the health effects of violence and abuse. In October 2013, he was inducted into the Tulsa, Oklahoma Hall of Fame. He will continue promoting his passion for helping young children live optimally as the medical director of the American Academy of Pediatrics' new Center on Healthy, Resilient Children. And I welcome him to speak today on building healthy, resilient children. Robert Block.
Good afternoon. When I'm done, we're all going to go to the bar or... So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm not quite done yet. I also have no disclosures for today's presentation. And I do want to start out by talking about the AAPI's response to everything that we've been learning about today. And I must tell you that this is a very gratifying experience to be a part of this excellent panel of speakers that we've been able to entice to come and share with us today. I think that the Academy has been talking about several of these topics that you've heard about today for quite a while. We haven't quite known what to do about them. We've had a president in Bernard Dreyer who was very interested in social determinants of health and talked a lot about poverty particularly. President Sandy Hassink has talked to us about some physical issues, particularly around child nutrition, and that obviously is related to the topics we've been talking about today. So our goal is to come up with, in a positive sense, a center for healthy or on healthy, resilient children. And as you can see, the goal is to build stronger families and to end toxic stress. Ending toxic stress will not happen in my lifetime, and perhaps not in the lifetime of many of you in the room, but it will eventually end because the alternative is sort of global disaster. And I hope that we are beyond allowing that to happen. I think that the center will be a place where resources will be available. Some already are through the Academy, and I'll end with some more information on that. But we want to develop resources that touch upon everything you've talked about so far today, including payment. So one of the promises that I made early on as we talked about developing the center is that we not only would ask pediatricians to learn about and to deal with childhood adversities, the social determinants of health and toxic stress, but we would work with, through the amazing mechanism that the Academy has, to work with both government payers and private insurers to guarantee that they will pay for the time and effort that it takes to do this work. Their failure to do that, which then would allow our failure to provide what is necessary, could well be the end of child well-being in this country, and I don't think anybody in this room is going to allow that to happen. So part of what we want to do at the center is to work with all aspects, including businesses, as has been mentioned, medical schools, pediatric residencies, family practice residencies, to try and integrate everything that we've talked about today into the next generation of practice. And that's one of the things that the center will be focusing on. We're going to try and encourage individual pediatrician efforts in this area, as you've heard very eloquently this afternoon. We're going to look at screening techniques for ACEs and screening techniques for resilience. We're going to try and figure out how to do the work that is being done in some of the places that you've already heard about today, and try and find ways to integrate that into the pediatric practices of the future. That's going to require two things. One is gathering resources, Never a day goes by now that something isn't published about ACE studies, about resiliency. And we need to gather those resources, make them available in a time-efficient manner for pediatricians and all the other people that are working with you all in your practices so that those resources can inform the future practice. And then we want to build partnerships. This, as has been mentioned today, is not something that happens within a practice all by itself. And you've heard some marvelous examples of relationships that practices have made with community resources and other resources. Now, because I knew I was going to be last, I threw in this slide that is blank, because it says so far highlights from today. I couldn't figure out how to, in 30 seconds, put down all the highlights and get them into a slide, but they are here. So let me just make a couple of comments about each of the talks that you've heard. Wonderful talk from everybody, and Nadine, thank you for leading that off. I was impressed with your mentioning a fact that, believe it or not, I knew because I know Vince Felitti and worked with him quite a bit, the suicide risk increase that comes with the number of adversities that some children experience. I learned a term the other day from a suicide worker that I wanted to share with you. They do no longer like the term commit suicide. They are now talking about you die from suicide. Emphasize the fact that you don't commit a heart attack, you don't commit a brain tumor, but you might die from those causes. You don't commit suicide, you die from suicide, and you die from suicide because of the adversities that have been hidden quite often in your life. And recognizing that these causes are hidden and doing something about them before the suicide occurs is one of the challenges and great opportunities that we have. Lots of the speakers, but Nadine began by talking about neurologic, immunologic alterations, endocrine, epigenetics, and circulatory problems that are all now, at least partially, and some in a very high measure, connected with the new science, the evolving science of stress. I first learned about stress science from Robert Sapolsky, who's a neuroscientist at Stanford, who wrote a book that you should all read. It's called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. And it's very much the same as the tiger example that we saw. Zebras don't get ulcers because when they're drinking at a water hole and a lion approaches, one of two things is going to happen. Number one, they're going to run, the lion will catch them and eat them, and so they have no further problems with stress. The other is because they're a zebra, they'll run faster than the lion, and they will be saved, and they'll go on eating grass and eventually come back to the water because their memory is very short. Not so with human beings. But I think that Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers is a book that I really like to recommend. We've talked about, and Nadine kicked it off with screening, the dilemma of referral sources. And I wanted to, it reminded me of something that was said this morning on our global program on toxic stress. And it made me wonder, why do we tolerate in our country as well as now in other countries, why do we tolerate inequality? Why do we allow the inequality that we see in this country between the haves and the have-nots, the people who live in comfortable circumstances and the people that don't? We mentioned Baltimore. There was a picture in USA Today after the Baltimore riots occurred, and the mayor said, "Our country is being burned by thugs." And there was a picture of several young men who were on a car and were gesticulating and doing things. And the mayor's words were underneath that. We're being burned by thugs. Well, I have a question for you. When did those four guys become thugs? Were they born thugs? On their first birthday, did everybody sing "Happy Birthday, Dear Thug"? What we've been talking about all afternoon is the evolution in their environment and in their neurologic and all the other systems into perhaps thugism that could have been prevented. And that's what really our work is going to be all about. Denise talked a little bit about mental health, and so did all of the other speakers, and so I want to throw out a new idea. Well, it's not a new idea anymore, but it's an idea that I think might resonate. I don't like the term mental health. Mental health has such stigma. Mental health creates opportunities for insurance companies not to pay us for the most important work that we do. Right? How many of you sent in a payment form and it comes back, "Oh, I'm sorry, this is a mental health problem and the coverage doesn't include mental health." It's not mental health, it's brain health. We're learning today that many of the organs in the body respond to the health of the brain. The brain is a very important determinant in the overall health of folks, not just the things that we have since the days of mental hygiene called mental health. Now, I could talk about that all day, but Tammy won't let me, so I won't. I think that Denise talked about the resiliency of parents, and I think that that would be a wonderful area of study to find out how some people can tolerate the level of adversity that they've experienced as they've evolved into adults and parents, and other people have very great difficulties with that. Some of it will be epigenetic because these problems are intra and intergenerational. The technical versus adaptive work concept was discussed, and I think that's really interesting because we all learn how to put in an IV. Pediatricians don't, well, and residents don't do that anymore because we have teams to do that. But I think learning adaptive work, since we now have more time, that we don't have to struggle with the IV, we can learn some adaptive work. So I think that this connection now between physical health and brain health is something that is a good topic for us to follow up on. Heather was talking about sleeping, eating, and toileting, and that trauma is a new perspective to that, and she had her video about John and his asthma. So I'm going to very quickly tell you a personal story that's absolutely true. Many years ago, when I was a first, second, and third year resident at CHOP, there was a boy who came in frequently. I'm going to call him Michael. Michael came in frequently with unbelievable asthma. Now, because this was many years ago, we didn't have a whole lot of treatments for his asthma as we have today. And he kept coming in, and we'd struggle with him. His chart, paper chart, right? No computers back there many years ago. His paper chart was about this thick. I mean, it was in 5 volumes, and it was all about coming into the emergency room with asthma. And one night when I was a senior resident, which meant I was the most senior person in the hospital that night, those of you who are young can't imagine that that might happen, but it did. Michael came in, and he was really in distress. He came into the emergency room. I went down to see him. We struggled and struggled and struggled. We couldn't get him better. We weren't going to be able to discharge him from the emergency room, so we had to take him upstairs and put him in what passed for a PICU or a PICU bed, which meant that there was a special nurse next to his bed in a big ward. And we struggled with him, and I'd been on for about 30 hours before that. I was really tired. And I just sort of lost control, and I asked a very indelicate, very awkward question, but it actually had a good result. My question, Michael, what the hell is going on? I know you're all going, huh? But you know what? He told me. And what was going on was the typical story that we heard before in terms of the domestic violence that was occurring in his house regularly between the first father figure that he knew, which was not his father, the second man that the mother brought into the house, and now the third. And as he got older, he started to increase his attempts to intervene when the father or the boyfriends would beat up the mother. And every time he would start having an asthma attack. All the years, we tried and worked with him to break the asthma attack, and it was a tired Bob Block who said, what the hell is going on, that opened the door to being able to help him. That's not a personal aggrandizement thing, that's a teaching point. What the hell is going on is probably not a very good question. But worded better can be a very helpful question. RJ provided a model for us of trauma-informed practices. He mentioned that the episodic kind of care, like starting the IV, is pretty easy thing to teach and to learn and to do. But the endemic part of what we're now being asked to do, to explore and to try and provide resources for parents, for children, and by the way, also for grandparents, because epigenetics is passing through, we really need to pay some attention to that. I think that your reference to Ken Ginsberg's book on that talks about the 7 C's and resiliency in children. I did a little research. I went to the Barnes & Noble bookstore in Tulsa, Oklahoma the other day. There was 1 copy of his book on the parenting shelf. The manager and I had some words about that, and I suspect there's still just 1 copy on the shelf. Larry talked about confidentiality, which is a very important issue, and how to ask open-ended questions to sort of get at anxieties and fears and to be careful about assumptions that we might make about patients or that patients might make about us. And then I wanted to end with one of the themes that I think I heard throughout the day. I'm not going to end, I have 2 more slides, but to end this slide, I heard, not necessarily using the word, but I heard a lot about hope. I think that we have to be careful to not get bogged down in the fact that the children in this country, and as I learned this morning in other countries as well, many of them are having adversities piled upon them. The toxicity of stress is the stress that's created by the folks that are supposed to be taking care of them, who are supposed to be nurturing them, who are supposed to be dealing with them. You know, there's a reason why some of the refugees that we're seeing now on television that are pouring into other countries, there's a reason that they're going to be, they may have episodic stress, they may have a stress mountain to climb, but they're going to be okay. And you know why they're going to be okay? In every one of those pictures that you see where they're coming off the boats, how are they getting off the boats? A caring adult, usually a parent, is carrying them off the boat. If they have that experience with the parent who can nurture them and reassure them and get them through the horror that they're going through, that's a much different situation than when a parent or another caregiver is the one creating the trauma. So there is hope, and I think that talking about hope makes a great amount of sense for us. There is a resource that I want to talk to you about called the ACEs Connection Network. How many of you either know about ACEs Connection or are on it? Check it out. It is a movement to sort of prevent ACEs, heal trauma, build resilience. And every day, be careful if you don't like to get emails, every day you get an email from the ACEs Connection which has information about a blog or an article or a piece of research that has caught their eye. Jane Stevens is the woman who runs this. It's free, so just think about that as a resource for learning more every day. You can click on some of the resources that come in the email and get more information. So I wanted to make sure to comment on that. Other information can come from the American Academy of Pediatrics. You have on your table posters that you can put up in the office from the Resilience Project. This one says, I think are they all the same, Tammy, or there's different ones. This one says, doctors can help make your kids well, but only you can make them thrive. A really nice thing to have on the door of the exam room, and when you go in the room, you could say, did you notice the poster on the door? What did that mean to you? Why not? The Resilience Project is one of the completed works of the Academy, and one of the things that is going to be a resource for us. So there are additional resources. Some of these have already been mentioned in the previous talks, but we did a symposium here in DC some time ago. It was a symposium on toxic stress. The entire video recording of that symposium is available on the web, and it's selectable. So you don't have to watch from morning till 5 o'clock at night, one talk after the other. You can go to specific talks on specific topics and watch just those parts. The early brain and child development people at the Academy have been working very hard now for a number of years, and a lot of the information, a lot of the work that they've done has been translated to information that's on the EBCD part of the AAP.org website. And then, of course, I just mentioned the Resilience Project, which is completed now and is going to morph into part of the foundation for our new Center on Healthy, Resilient Children. And there's some other resources that are up there for you. So in closing, I want to make an unanticipated remark. How many of you noticed on the posters in the front as you were coming into the room, who sponsored this symposium? It's the Friend of Children's Fund. If you don't have a donor ribbon, that means you've not contributed to the Friends of Children Fund. As a past president of the AAP, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart, I am dismayed that only 4% of the members of the American Academy of Pediatrics contribute to Friends of Children. 87% or some such number of our staff contribute. 87, we'll use that number, % of staff contribute. I would ask you all to do that as well, because Friends of Children gives the Academy an opportunity to go outside the annual budget expenses and revenues and create projects like this one and provide the funding for that. So if everybody in this room and the room across the hall would just think for a second, maybe I could go home and maybe I could just, maybe for a month I can give up my Monday lattes and send $25 to the American Academy of Pediatrics for the Friends of Children Fund. Wouldn't that be terrific? Because there's enough people in these two rooms to up that 4% to maybe 5%. So let's give it a shot. And I'll close with this comment. My personal investment in this is carefully monitored by Fan Tate, who's in the back of the room, and her wonderful, wonderful staff at the Academy. All of this creates opportunities like this for us, and thanks to everyone who was responsible for today's afternoon, both our presenters and the staff that stands behind us all, and for all of you for attending and being interested in this topic. The future of pediatrics is in our hands and the hands of the future pediatricians. I'm hopeful that we'll start educating around these topics in medical school, probably even in college, because this would be wonderful pre-med courses. The last word I want to mention is ecology, and ecology was mentioned at least once today. The ecology of a child is an incredibly important thing to explore. We've heard different approaches to how to do that. Where this child lives, what his or her relationship as an organism to his or her environment is critically important. And as we learn more and more about the positive aspects of that as well as the negative, we will become better pediatricians, our children will be healthier, and our country as well as the world will be a brighter place. Thank you all for your attending today.